Welcome back, Endgame community. It's Chris, and I know a lot of you still haven't reached a trade deadline in your fantasy leagues, so I'm going to help you out and bring you some of my favorite buy low running backs heading into the Week 12 and the stretch run for the fantasy playoffs. Let's get into it. All right, let's start with Alvin Kamara. It's been a rough patch here for Alvin Kamara. It's been a weird season for Alvin Kamara, right? Started off not very good, got injured, came back, was incredible, and now he hasn't been very good again. And look, I wasn't super high on Alvin Kamara heading into this season. I didn't think we'd see vintage Alvin Kamara ever again. And look, we probably won't see vintage Alvin Kamara ever again. And we might not see him again this year. But Alvin Kamara is still a high floor RB2. He still catches plenty of passes. He still is going to help teams win fantasy championships, and he's probably going to help teams win fantasy championships in the fantasy playoffs because he has two more brutal matchups with San Francisco and Tampa Bay, and then the team heads into the bye. But if you can survive that, if you can get through that, he has a great playoff schedule with Atlanta, Cleveland, and Philadelphia. So again, this is a guy right now not being valued very highly. If you can go out and get Alvin Kamara, don't think you're getting, RB1, every week smash Alvin Kamara, but if you understand that you're getting a solid RB2 with weekly upside who can definitely help you in the fantasy playoffs with those great matchups, go try to get Alvin Kamara right now. Ride out the storm of the next couple of weeks. It may be rough, obviously the bye, but if you can get through that, if you don't need Alvin Kamara right now, he's a great buy low who is going to help teams win when it matters. It looked early in the season and even for most of the season that Nick Chubb was going to be a league winner this year, but we have kind of seen the last couple of weeks here the worry for Nick Chubb, or the reason why Nick Chubb has never really been, an elite fantasy running back in the past, and that's because he can get games scripted out, and when he doesn't score touchdowns, he doesn't really give you a whole lot. And if you look at the last two games, yes, 2 weeks ago he had that long touchdown run to save his day, but outside of that, really did nothing. Here in week 11, really did nothing. People are nervous that when Deshaun Watson comes back, this offense is going to be more pass heavy. They won't rely on the run as much. We've seen him get game scripted out. We see when they fall way behind, he just doesn't get a lot of touches. He doesn't get a lot of carries. People are starting to get a little bit low on Nick Chubb again, thinking, okay, maybe he got hot there for a while, and now we're seeing the old Nick Chubb, the guy who's good in fantasy, but not great, not elite in fantasy. But I'm not buying any of that. I still think Nick Chubb will be very good. He still has immense weekly touchdown upside. And if anything, if this offense gets better with Deshaun Watson, even if they throw the ball more, he's probably going to have more opportunities to score touchdowns, which is what you're really hoping for with Nick Chubb. So this is a guy that should be viewed as a mid to low RB1 right now. And I don't know if people are viewing him that way. So maybe they are, maybe they aren't. You never know. It's worth exploring. It's worth finding out because, Nick Chubb's one of those guys you just set and forget every single week. So if you can go get him at a relatively good discount right now, I think you do it. And it looks like Najee Harris is back, baby. Yes, it took 11 weeks, but we're finally getting the Najee Harris we drafted. Now, I get for a lot of you, it's probably too late. And it might even be too late for the guy in your league who has Najee Harris. But that's good for you because you can go trade for him. I get it. He's coming off a big game. I never put players in here coming off big games because how do you buy low on a guy who's coming off a big game? Well, you buy low on him because there's people out there who still think this game was a fluke. They're looking at the first, 9-10 weeks and thinking that's the real Najee Harris and this game was a fluke. And you can still potentially go buy low on him. But we've seen it the last 2 weeks. Number one, he's looked great running the ball. Look, maybe that injury that he had early in the season was way more severe than they let on and really limited him. But he's looked great the last 2 weeks. This was a tough Cincinnati run defense, and he ripping off big runs, yards after contact, everything you want to see from him. But also, Jaylen Warren suffered a hamstring injury. Now, we don't know the severity of this, but we saw with Jaylen Warren out, Najee Harris played 93% of the snaps, caught passes, got goal line work, got everything we wanted from Najee Harris when we drafted him in the first round a couple months ago. But again, the person in your league might be looking at Najee Harris thinking this is a fluke, this is the time to buy low, and Najee Harris has one of, if not the best, remaining schedules for running backs. It's extremely soft, so if you can go get Najee Harris right now, you do it absolutely. Now let's switch to your running back who is coming off a terrible game, and that is Dameon Pierce. 8 yards against the Commanders. Look, I get the Commanders have a good run defense, but come on, 8 yards. And look, Dameon Pierce wasn't lighting the world on fire before this. Yes, he was giving you, a nice high floor every week, but he wasn't going nuts, putting up huge fantasy games. Now people who have Dameon Pierce are getting really, really low on Dameon Pierce. But Dameon Pierce also has a very good remaining schedule, and he's still the only running back that really gets touches in this offense. Eno Benjamin, who they claimed off waiver wire, wasn't even active for this game. Rex Burkhead barely involved. Dameon Pierce is still a good running back. We've seen him have success all year long, and this guy is due for major touchdown regression positively. Like, he should have way more touchdowns than he does right now. Will he score more touchdowns in the second half? Nobody knows, but he should. And again, he's got a great rest of season schedule. Not quite as good as Najee's, but still pretty good. A lot of great matchups in there that you can exploit with him. And right now, you might be able to get him at a value as like a low-end borderline RB2. If you can do that, absolutely do it right now. And then finally, imagine I tell you there's a running back who over the last 2 games has almost 200 yards rushing, is averaging over 6 yards per carry, and has over 30 carries over that stretch. You'd say, like, no way you could buy low on that guy. But you can, and his name is Isaiah Pacheco. And for whatever reason, nobody thinks Isaiah Pacheco has been any good. He's out here running for almost 100 yards in back-to-back games, over 100 yards in week 11, running for over 6 yards per carry, like I said. He's in a great offense. He's in an offense that allows him to pick up chunk yards because teams aren't worried about the run. They're worried about the pass. They're playing that 2-deep zone. They're playing man. They're not worried about stopping the run. Now, though, on the one downside for Pacheco, he's not going to catch any passes, hardly at all. And really, you never know what you're going to get with touchdowns. You think, oh, it's the Chiefs, he should score tons of touchdowns. But really, they get near the goal line, they throw the ball a lot. But still, we saw it early in the year with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. There is touchdown upside in this offense, and he's giving you a extremely high floor every single week. He's clearly the lead back now. CEH barely involved. I know he left with that ankle injury, but even before that, barely involved. McKinnon, just kind of a change of pace, pass catching back. No, Pacheco is probably not going to be some league-winning RB1 down the stretch, but if you just need a running back you can plug into your lineup every single week, know you're going to get a high floor with a decent ceiling when he scores touchdowns, and they have, a really nice schedule as well in the fantasy playoffs. I think Pacheco is a great buy low right now. Go out and try to get him. And then another guy that's kind of been forgotten is Antonio Gibson. In this matchup in week 11 against Houston, we liked both Gibson and Brian Robinson, but there's a big problem for Brian Robinson. He's not very good. I'm sorry. Look, I like Brian Robinson. I want Brian Robinson to be good. I want Brian Robinson to succeed, but he's been terrible this year. He's averaging 3.3 yards per carry, only averaged 3.8 yards per carry against the Houston Texans, by far the worst run defense in the entire NFL. And Antonio Gibson, not only was Antonio Gibson much better on the ground, he got more work than Brian Robinson, and he's been way better than Brian Robinson on the ground. And I think we're going to start to see this shift where Antonio Gibson takes over this backfield because he's just much more talented than Brian Robinson right now. Plus, Antonio Gibson catches passes, Brian Robinson does not. So Antonio Gibson at least gives you that pass catching, and J.D. McKissick's season is over. Antonio Gibson is going to have to be the guy to catch passes here. Now, I will say, one word of caution here. They have a tough remaining schedule up until week 17 when they get the Cleveland Browns. So maybe you're not going to want to play Antonio Gibson in a lot of those matchups. But look, if you're at this point, you shouldn't need Antonio Gibson. You shouldn't be desperate for Antonio Gibson. He's a guy you can go trade for, extremely cheap right now. Put him on your bench, hold him. And look, in that week 17 matchup, if you make it to your fantasy championship, he could absolutely be a guy you throw into your lineup who goes off that week and helps you win. All right, now that you know some of my favorite buy low running backs, what about wide receivers? What about who to start, who to sit, who kaboom? We got you covered. Everything you need to win in week 12. Check out our week 12 playlist right here.